Hello and welcome to another of Harry's Jeti Clinic. This is going to be the first of two episodes doing two different ways of achieving much the same end. There was a request on a Facebook group to have separate throttles for a twin-engined plane, such that at one position of the switch, the throttle stick, let's say in mine it's P4, works both throttle servos, and at the other position of the switch, the P6 slider could work the other servo independently. Now, a few people piled in with, oh, I just do it with logic switches or mixing. Unfortunately, none of the suggestions worked. Some of them failed straight away because they involved menu options that don't even exist. And all of them are basically good ideas, but completely failed as throttles because they either did not have any trim on them, which is a bit blooming useless for a throttle when you're trying to adjust the idle, or if you did try and fudge trim into it, it absolutely messed up the endpoints because you cannot get it to behave as a proper trim at the throttle low type of trim when you add it in. And this actually took a heck of a lot more work to solve than I think it should have done. So there might be better ways of doing this. So if you think there is, please do a thorough test of it and tell us about it. Put up a video of it or put in the comments about it. But please don't just comment, oh, you just mix, because you've got to make sure that your trims not only work at the bottom end, but that they're not still influencing the top end. And I tell you, you'll find it a dash sight harder than you think it is. So the original request, as I said, was to have a slider, but one of the suggestions was using logic switches with a 3-position switch, so that in position 1, the throttle stick worked the left-hand engine. In position 2, the throttle stick worked the right-hand engine. And in position 3, it worked both engines. And I love that concept. But again, the details that were given with it there were menu options that don't exist. Trim wasn't included. And logic switches would force a throttle cut, not an idle, on the engine you're not controlling at that time. Nevertheless, I've solved it. So what we're going to do is in this edition is look at the one where we use a side slider, and I'll put a link up at the end of the video to the next one where we look at using the 3-position switch and only using the throttle stick. So it gets quite involved, and the issue here is because we want the throttle trim to be included and to work properly. Any other version I tried, and believe me, I tried all sorts of including trims in the function assignment, including trims in the digital trim menu, mixing with trims, mixing without trims. Nothing would work properly. Oh yes, it appeared to. If your trim is at neutral, everything looks hunky-dory. It all appears to work. You add 10-20% up trim to bring the idle up a bit, and your top ends of your travels, everything just went screwy. And people suggested even, just adjust the servo travel ends. How's that going to work if you change the trim? Because now you've restricted the servo moving, and you're not going to get full throttle. So this method really works. So bear with it. Let's have a look. We're going to be doing some interesting concepts here. I'm going to menu. I have created a basic model, one engine. Yes, I know this is a twin, but one engine's all we need for this part of it. Okay, what we're going to do is go into functions assignment. We're going to create 3 new functions. For brevity, not wasting too much time in this, I'll call it T1 for throttle 1. Okay. T2 for throttle 2. Okay. And T slide for the slider. Okay. T slider. We'll use P6, which is my slider on the left side. So we do that. Now we have to think what T1 and T2 are going to be. There's no point in assigning them to the stick because that doesn't bring the proper trimming with it, even if you then add the P4 trim with it. It doesn't work. And so if you try adding the P4 trims in digital trims and set that to throttle low trim, still doesn't do the job. This is where we get sneaky. We are going to say that the control is the channel, the throttle channel. So we're leaving a proper throttle function in there. The throttle function will then get, trims will be added to its output. The throttle cut switch will work on that, and that'll affect its output. So what we're trying to do is pick up the output, because that has the throttle stick, the throttle trims, and the throttle cut switch in it. Okay. Is it proportional? Go to center. Yes. Same with T2. Okay. Servo assignment. What I'm going to do is, we can leave throttle 1 there. In reality, if you're a bit short of channels on your, we're not going to plug anything in here. So if you're a bit short of channels on your receiver, just move the throttle function up to, a channel beyond what your receiver does. But of course, in the steps we've just done, make sure you change the assigned output to the new output here. Yeah. So if you're using an 8-channel receiver, because we're not plugging anything in here, and you may need all 8 channels, move the throttle up to channel 9 or 12 or whatever. But I say just go back and set your assigned thing not to 01 but to output whatever. Okay, and I'll come down here and I'll assign T1 to there, and just so that we can see it easily in the servo output screens, I'll assign T2 to that one there. So it's just so when we're watching the bars, it's easy to see and compare to throttle up there. Indeed, what I'll do is remove the elevator there, just so that later on, it'll just make the display easier to see. Okay, right, we're starting to get somewhere now. Okay, there we are. Here's our true throttle function and output, but we're not going to connect a servo to it. As I said, move it up to some unused channel if you need to. Here's our two, T1 and T2, which are taking their data, not from the stick, but from what's actually here. So of course they replicate it exactly. See that? And if I adjust the trim now, it goes with it beautifully. I've pushed the trim up. I still go to full throttle and they stop at 100. They don't go above it. Okay. What else can we do? We can go into advanced properties, other model options, assign the throttle cut switch. That's mine. Do that. Lift it up. Say OK. OK to that. Now we'll prove it again. There we go. Throttle cuts off. Everything working quite happily. The trim's up a bit, so we've come back to minus 81% as the idle. But of course, if we operate the throttle cut, it's been set to go back to minus 100, and there we are. So the trims work beautifully, the throttle cut works beautifully. How then do we get the side slider to take over control? Because I'm moving the side slider P6 and nothing's happening. Okie doke. Fairly straightforward now that we've got those things going. We go into free mixes, add, and the first thing we're going to do is stop the throttle stick from operating that output. let's say that T1 is the left engine and T2 is the right-hand engine, and that we want to keep T1 on the throttle stick and move T2 to the side slider. So T2 is the one we want to work on here. So T2 will mix to itself at minus 100%. And what that does is that whatever value is in T2, it'll multiply it by, it'll add minus 1 of itself to itself, and it'll come back to 0. This is the switch we want to use. So we'll use forward for both servos working off this throttle stick, back for stick and slider. So there's our value. Come along, put the switch in the both engines of the stick position, switch on the switch, pull the switch so that it's now stick and slider position, say OK to that. And the result is, if we look at the servo output, there's the left-hand engine, 5, still working, but the right-hand engine, number 7, has gone to 0%. If I switch back to both engines on the throttle stick, you can see they're now working fine. So we've got part of the way. What we've done is disable, if I switch it, number 7 no longer works to the throttle stick, but it's locked at 0, in other words, somewhere around mid-throttle. Not a problem. This is where we add another mixer from, this time, T slider to T2, come down into advanced, master value, 100%, and the switch, again, we'll start with this switch in the both engines on the throttle stick position, activate that, pull it to the stick and slider position, say OK, OK to that. Let's go back in just for the servo monitor. And there we are. I'll move the slider down. There we go. Now the slider's working the opposite way to that which I want. Don't reverse the servo, because remember, to the throttle stick, it's working the correct way. But I've decided I want my slider, when it's working, to work in the opposite direction. So we just say OK to that. Come back to our master value, change it to minus 100. Let it stay in the screen. And there we go. So the slider is now working the way round that I want it to go. Switch to both engines on the throttle stick. Watch the outputs. Throttle stick working nicely. Switch to stick and slider. They don't move because they're both at the full throttle position. I'll move the stick back to idle. Only one comes back. I'll move the slider back to its 0 position. There. That exposes the next problem. We can bring the slider back to minus 100. Okie dokie. How can we solve that one? Not in the mixing, because you'll affect all ends of it and it starts getting messy. Very simple way. Having decided, let's say, that there's your trim point. That's using the trims, you've got a nice idle at minus 80%. What we can do is say OK to that for the moment. Come out of here, go to your function curve, go to T slide, change it to a 3-pointer. And now we want to know which is the idle end. I'll move the T slider. There we are. There's the gun sight showing where the slider is. I'm going to move it to idle. Idle's that end. There's the idle end. Press the programming button, jumps to here. Press the programming button, jumps to there. I'll just turn that down to, what was the value? It was 80, wasn't it? Say OK. Now let's look at servo monitor. Stick switches forward, so both servos working off the stick. I'll put it there. I'll move the switch now to separate stick and slider. The slider's back at its idle position, which is now -80. So it now goes from -80 to 100, just like the stick does. I'll move the throttle stick. They were going from -80 to +100, and the slider now goes from -80 to +100. And if I move the switch forward, there we go. The only thing that doesn't work when you're in separate mode is the throttle cut. There, see, it doesn't affect it. But if you just go into both on together working off the stick, then throttle cut does the job. Okie doke. And we'll come back a little while later with another video showing you the 3-position logic switch that allows you to run the whole thing off the throttle stick.